Hello and welcome back to another episode of Oh and That's a Bad Miss. I've just realised I left my door open, so I'm going to close that and pretend it's not happening during the intro. Could always restart, but that's not going to happen because we run a professional ship round here. Totally. Anyway, yes, welcome back, episode 20, which is wild. Didn't think I'd make it this far. I thought this was going to be one of those things where I make one episode, two episodes, and then quit, like I've done with plenty of other projects in the past. It's like the whole thing on Reddit. Which, of course, this episode is brought to you by reddit.com/r/snooker. I thought that the discussion threads were going to be me trying to boost the attendance during tournaments onto the subreddit, and it turns out that now I'm the moderator. There is one more senior moderator than me, but he's not very active, so I'm the one relatively active moderator on the platform. So it's one of those things. Didn't think I'd hit 20 episodes, but thanks for the support as ever, because I made it. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Although you don't tune in to listen to me talking about how cool it is that we've made some episodes, you listen for snooker news. And the first bit of news is something I failed to address last week while I was summing up what's happened in the off season. I missed that Clive Everton is receiving an MBE, which is pretty awesome for him. Clive, obviously, editor of Snooker Scene magazine, the voice of snooker for so many years, currently only does the ITV tournaments, and he's sort of past his prime. He's been getting on for a few years, but now it's really starting to be noticeable. The lovely sullen tones of Clive Everton have sort of, I don't know, he's noticeably older, noticeably slower, making a few more mistakes, but obviously it's always nice to hear him on the telly, and absolutely chuffed for him to get recognised with an MBE, as he should. I mean, he's done so much for snooker and billiards over the years, and yeah, he deserves everything he gets. Speaking of people who have done a lot for snooker over the years, on the 28th of July, unfortunately, we lost John D. He died at the age of 82, and if you are, like I was before that day, not aware of who John D was, he spent 3 decades as a snooker journalist, so he was very well known behind the scenes within the press boxes, and just by a lot of the players like Mark Williams, referee Jan Verhaas, Joe Perry, and lots of other top names have all taken to Twitter and other social medias to tweet out and let him be known, let it be known how much he did for the game, and one person who's really shown what he's done for the game and what he's done for people behind the scenes is Dave Hendon. Dave Hendon, obviously Eurosport commentator now, journalist within snooker, also a playwright, also has a absolutely cracking podcast, which is part of Snooker Scene. It's a Snooker Scene podcast. Just finished listening to the latest episode earlier today at work, and it's absolutely fantastic, so obviously I recommend you go listening to that. I'd love to do a bit with Dave Hendon in the future at some point, but obviously that's his listener numbers, I imagine, are a lot better than mine are, and he's a much bigger name than I am. So I'd love to work with him one day. Probably a big personal goal of mine. And John D, the gentleman who passed away, got Dave Hendon into that sort of inner circle, and Dave had some fantastic stories about him. So I will leave a link down in the description and on the description of any iTunes, Spotify, however you're listening, to a piece Dave wrote the day after he passed. Some fantastic stories. He seemed like a hell of a character, and obviously he'll be missed by a lot of people. Now, Oliver Lines, son of Peter Lines, a fellow professional, has enlisted the work of Chris Henry in order to focus on the more mental side of the game. Now, Oliver is currently placed 78th in the world rankings, and he's on his second year of his tour card, so obviously needs to boost up his rankings, otherwise he will be forced to re-enter Q School, find another way to qualify. If he will be removed from the tour at the end of the season unless he improves his current ranking. Now, Chris Henry has worked with other snooker players in the past. In fact, he's currently working with Shaun Murphy and has previously worked with Stephen Hendry, Jimmy White, Peter Ebdon and Ding Junhui. So he's got a great history, although obviously Stephen Hendry eventually succumbed to the mental issues he was facing during the final part of his career. But I think that's something that gets brought up a lot, but it can never be over talked about is the mental side of snooker. In a game where, I mean, how many frames of snooker have these professionals played? Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even to the hundreds of thousands for the likes of Ronnie O'Sullivan and Stephen Hendry. It's stuff, every pot and positional play that a snooker player goes for in a match, they have done. Pretty much. They've pretty much done it on the practice table. And they've done it. They've successfully done it. They know that they can make this shot and make the positional play. It's just about whether their brain gets in the way. If there's a disconnect, if there's a loss of focus, if there's a self-belief issue. So that's where a lot of these players have started enlisting coaches. Not for any physical aspect, although I'll get onto that in a minute, but for the mental side. And Ronnie has enlisted, I can't remember the name of his sort of coach, mentor guy, but he puts a lot of his turnaround in behaviour and in his play and his willingness to even play snooker on that man. So I think a lot of the players have seen that and thought, oh no, this is definitely worth getting into. And if Oliver Lyons can finish this season, guaranteed another 2-year tour card, it might be something even more players look into. It's one of those things to keep an eye out. Look how Oliver Lyons does. He's managed to have a couple of decent runs. I think he made, the quarterfinals of the UK Championships. But that's about it. He hasn't had consistency. And he practices along the likes of Judd and Jack Lisowski. So he can hold his own, and he's beaten some top players. It's just about getting that self-belief up. It's about getting that focus. It's about taking the next step from professional to top 16 player. Now, I said I'd get into the physical side of the game. I think I mentioned this probably 15 episodes ago or something, but I think my example was Mark Allen then, because Mark Allen, I think he's lost a bit of weight since, but he was looking rather round in the nicest possible way, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean, shapes are a fact, and I used to be a big fat bastard too. So I feel like the physical side of snooker is something people don't put enough importance on, because obviously if you're in a better physical state, your mental state allows you to focus more. If you're healthier body, well, it's a bit of a niche, a bit of a cliche. Healthy body, healthy mind. Not necessarily accurate when it comes to mental health conditions, but healthy body, you're more able to focus, your brain thinks clearer, you're getting more sleep, you're feeling better in general. Could that be the difference between some of the top players stepping back up onto the top pedestal? Like, look at Ronnie O'Sullivan, an avid runner, an avid health enthusiast, and he's one of the best of all time. Judd, a young man who's in decent shape, and he's playing some of the best snooker anyone's seen ever. So maybe I'm putting too much on it, but that's probably my biggest factor in snooker success that people don't focus on enough, even the professionals. I think if we were to see Shaun Murphy and Mark Allen lose a serious amount of weight, I think their performances may improve. But as we're about to find out, Mark Allen and Shaun Murphy aren't having too many issues recently, as we move into the coverage for the International Championships, which it was a Chinese tournament held in Daqing, China. My pronunciation's as ever on point. So the timings are a bit awkward. The matches started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the second sessions would start at 12:30, sort of just gone midday, and that makes it a bit awkward for people who work, like myself. I'm at work for both of those sessions, and that means lower TV ratings, and it's a Chinese tournament, and that means lower physical attendance unless there's Chinese players involved, because I don't know if you watched any of it, but there was like 7 people in those tournaments watching from the crowd, and half of them were on their phone. It's quite unfortunate, because it was a lot of money. It was £175,000 to the winner, despite this only being the 8th time it's actually been held. So it's managed to make its way into the upper echelon of matches, of tournaments, in quite a short amount of time. But a lot of the Chinese tournaments just don't seem to get quite the amount of respect they might deserve, but maybe that'll change if Ding becomes world champion or if another Chinese player becomes world champion. Only time will tell. Now, I'll skip forward through the early rounds. There was only one major shock that I can think of, and that was Jack Jones taking out Mark Williams 6-2 or 6-3, something along those lines. I didn't write it down, but obviously that's a big surprise. Mark obviously winning the World Championship 2 seasons ago, and not struggling since, but I don't know, he didn't look like winning the World Championship maybe last season. We'll see how his season progresses. Because remember, only a few years ago he was thinking about just dropping off the tour entirely because his form had hit such a low level. So maybe he's thinking, this is my last sort of couple of seasons before retirement. He's already said that he won't be returning to the Riga Masters next season, and he's thinking of taking a more limited schedule in the same way Ronnie O'Sullivan does. So that'll be an interesting one to follow. So, like I said, skip to the quarterfinals, and it was a much more conventional lineup than last month's Riga Masters, with Mark Allen taking on Ding Junhui, Graham Dott taking on Shaun Murphy, Gary Wilson coming up against ex-world number 1 Mark Selby, and Tom Ford being the only sort of surprising one, drawing the short straw and facing Judd Trump. Now, Shaun Murphy has managed to start a season pretty well after a disappointing season last year, where he said it himself, he couldn't buy a win. He was really struggling. Apart from that, obviously, whitewash in the first round of the World Championships. A lot of people last season were questioning his dedication to the sport, with the amount of time he spent on the golf course and the amount of time he spent in the punditry box. After his losses in the UK Championships and the World Championships, he worked with the BBC for a while, and a lot of people thought, oh, that was a bit quick, jumping straight off the table into punditry pretty much the next day or the same day as him being knocked out. Is his head really in the game, or is he focusing too much on life after snooker, despite the fact that he's obviously still got a long way to go within snooker? I don't think he lacks dedication. He does try and do a lot, so the snooker definitely suffered last season. So we'll see if maybe this season he drops off of his external responsibilities and focuses more on the table. And it clearly worked as he came up against Graham Dott, who I've seen as a bit of a dark horse the last few seasons. He's had a few good runs in a few tournaments, but obviously he's nowhere near the level that he was at his peak as world champion, and Shaun Murphy coming out the best of that matchup. Now, Ding looking good in China for the first time in a little while as he came up against Mark Allen, the defending champion. And Mark Allen, great guy by the looks of it, because he spent his summer running a charity Pro-Am tournament, and he raised 10,760 quid for a special needs school. And I mean, if karma's a thing, he is definitely in for a good season, and he deserves it. I mean, that's a great thing to do when you've got all that time off, putting your time to good causes. And it's not the first time he's done it. He's got a history of donating for charity, having charity auctions via Twitter. So yeah, nothing but respect for the lad. And he made it through to the semi-finals as well. Now, Gary Wilson, after such a great run in the World Championships, making it through to the semi-finals, which I don't think anyone saw coming. He's hoping to carry on that momentum and sort of keep climbing up the ranking ladder and possibly into the top 16, top 10, sort of hoping to be one of those tippy top of the professionals. But it was brought to a halt by Mark Selby in a deciding frame quarterfinal. Selby looked a lot better, which feels like it's a running theme for this tournament. He looked a lot better than he has done in a while. I think he a bit of banter between him and Judd Trump, with Mark Selby saying that Judd Trump's only keeping my world number 1 spot warm for me until I'm back up there. And speaking of Judd Trump, he was playing spectacularly this tournament. After defeating Joe Perry in the round of 16, he is the new world number 1. Pretty incredible, really. I mean, he not only winning the World Championship in the way he did, but his mentality towards snooker appears to have completely changed over the last year. Because couple of years ago, I remember looking at discussion threads when Judd Trump went out of the World Championships the year before, and it was Jimmy White comparisons because he was the nearly kid at that point. He was he had the talent. He just didn't have the head on his shoulders to get across that finish line. But guess what? He did finally. And if that's given him the wake-up call to stop the naughty snooker when he doesn't need it, obviously still having fun at the end of frames, but just not rushing into shots and focusing totally on the match and getting over that finish line instead of the showmanship aspects, which has cost him in the past. If that's been a wake-up call, we could be in for a very long run at world number one, especially looking at the way he played this weekend and the way he dominated the tournament. Yes, so Tom Ford, his opponent in the quarterfinals, made a 147 in qualification, which was obviously, it's the 152nd professional 147, and it's the first one in the new season, which allows that to go towards the 20 that are required to get that £1 million payout from Barry Hearn. Never going to happen. Honestly, never going to happen. You can keep this soundbite, clip it, little clip of me saying it, because it will never happen, and you can send it to me when it happens, because it won't. I mean, I'm happy to say 20 147s it might happen in 20 years, but it's not going to happen this season. It's not going to happen in the next 5 seasons, I guarantee you. I think 13 is the most there's ever been. I looked into that when Barry Hearn made the announcement, and it's just not going to happen. And it's like the Home Nations £1 million payout. It's safe money for Barry, but he can also say, look, I'm putting more money on the line. You're not. You're putting less money on the line. There's no rolling 147 prize anymore. There's just a way of conning players out of money for completing one of the most difficult things in sport. But anyway, moving on to a more jovial side of it. With that 147, obviously that was the highest break in the tournament. But the problem was when it came to accepting his highest break award at the victory celebrations at the end of the tournament, Tom Ford had already gone home. So the senior most referee has to accept it. That being Jan Verhaas. Issue being, it's a very ceremony-heavy culture in China, and therefore, instead of it just being, here you go, Jan, here's the plaque, give Tom our best, shame he couldn't be here. It was announce Jan Verhaas, have him walk down, put the wreath around his neck, have him hold and take a photo as if he'd done it, and it's probably one of my favourite snooker-related photos that's just sort of a bit off, because it's Jan Verhaas holding the top break frame plaque thing and smiling for the camera as if accepting it. And I don't know what it is about that photo, but it's just Jan Verhaas, knowing he's the consummate professional. He's got a good sense of humour, so I bet he found it as funny as everyone else did. But it's just such an odd thing, because that'd be a hell of a story if Jan Verhaas somehow made the highest break in a tournament. But before that, the victory celebrations, we did have the final, and the final was Shaun Murphy, who had squashed Mark Allen's attempts to retain his title in a 9-6 victory. Now, Shaun Murphy led 6-2 after the first session. I think he led 6-0 at one point. So Mark, I mean, to get the final score to be 9-6 was very impressive. And yeah, there's something to be said for being 6-0 down in a first to 9 and holding your own and keeping it going and trying and not getting your head down, because a lot of players would let their head drop, they'd give up. But yeah, Mark Allen, again, top bloke, hoping the best for him this season. And he took on obviously Judd Trump, who defeated Mark Selby 9-4 in the semi-finals. So obviously Shaun Murphy, Judd Trump in the final, and Judd just walked away with it. It was 10-3 in the final scoreline. I mean, like I said, if Judd's first couple of performances are anything to go by, he could be in for a very long time at the top spot of the world rankings. There's not much more you can ask for from winning World Championship to going straight to winning your first tournament back. I think that hasn't been done since Ronnie O'Sullivan in 2013, if I remember correctly. Spectacular. And a great tournament. It's just unfortunate that you had to put up with the awkward start times and some of the matches not having commentary on Eurosport, but that's the issue with following one of these sports, which it isn't quite mainstream enough to get the following that football does. But we still love it, don't we? And that brings us up to date. The next tournament is the Paul Hunter Classic, starting on the 24th of August and running through till the 27th. I find it such a shame of what that tournament has become. It's such a shell of a tournament. Very few players supporting it. I mean, fair play to all of the players who do support it, in the memory of such a fantastic player, Paul Hunter. We'll never forget him because, obviously, well, not only will we never forget him because he was incredible and influenced a lot of snooker players and a lot of people, myself included, but they named the Masters trophy after him. And sadly enough, despite the fact that he's got an entire tournament named after him, and it's a ranking event as well, it will be the trophy, I believe, that will be his most lasting legacy. Because, I mean, as he deserves, he was the king of the Masters for a few years, and that was a tournament that he always performed in, and he's missed heavily to this day. Sorry to end it on a bit of a sad note, but that's all I got for you this week. I will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks again for listening. If you want to hear more, you've got the subscribe button on YouTube, you've got the subscribe button on iTunes. Spotify, I believe, is the follow button. All of these things, it's just subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and that's a bad one, and reddit.com/r/snooker for daily discussion threads for all your favourite ranking tournaments. Well, just all of your ranking tournaments, not just your favourites. Yeah, I think that wraps everything up. Nice 22-minute long episode. I hope you enjoyed. First thing, big thank you for the response for the return after my hiatus. I had some DMs, I had the Reddit thread. Fantastic response. I'm absolutely chuffed and cannot thank you guys enough. So yeah, finally got there. I think that's the end. I will see you guys in the next episode.